Welcome to another episode of Nukes of Hazard. Great to have everybody here. Want to welcome Mike Kolodner to the mix today. Mike, thanks for being with us. Also Rob Whelan. Rob, thanks for taking a part of your day. And then Mike and Sarah Bradley. So let's dive in. We've got lots to discuss, both news, current events, and then great things that happen at Marsh and what Mike does day in and day out. So we'll kick it over to you. What's going on?
Yeah, well, hello everybody. Thanks for joining. Mike, thanks for joining a lot.
Yeah.
We'll do some quick intros. We got some spicy news items, and then we'd like to hear from you, Mike. What your career is like, Mike Kolodner, what you're up to. But we're getting close to summer. Travel season is heating up. Mike, where have you been? Mike Bradley. I know you've been
Bradley,
out and about.
I was just Matt. I was up in Polsbo, up in your old stomping grounds of my salon. So I was visiting the Nukes in Bremerton and Silverdale. And one kind of funny story, not exactly funny. There's a nuke up there that I really like that works for Homeland Security, and I guess they're all being brought back into the office now because of the Doge. It's kind of bad, like what this person is having to go to. I'll try to keep it very anonymous to protect the innocent. But they're being brought back into the office, but the office isn't big enough. So there's like 250 people in an office for like 50. So there's all these people like logging in, like in hallways and kitchenettes and whatever.
Crab wrapping.
Yeah. Then thinking like we are trained for this. Just
Trained for it.
Yeah. When we were on the submarine, just think of all the random places you studied, you conducted training. This is just another reason we submariners are superior. Right? Don't you think?
That's, if you say so, Mikey.
Okay. Yeah. Anyways, but all right, Rob, how about real news?
That's funny. Yeah, that's fun. No, I remember going weeks and sitting on my submarine like, dude, there's literally no good place to sit. I just want a nice place to sit. A lot of metal. Okay, so we got some fun news. Kind of the big news, at least in our world. Google has signed a deal to develop 1 gigawatts of advanced nuclear power with Elemental Power. So if you don't know who Elemental Power is, it's run by some former nukes and our colleagues, David and Daniel Faraday, and their reactor operators. And their business strategy is find the customer and then find the reactor, and they build and operate the reactors. They've been working on this one for a while. It's a fantastic deal for them. Very exciting for them. And really the idea is like, hey, Google needs to power their data centers, and they're looking at small modular reactors. Google also has a deal with Kairos Power, which is a reactor developer. So I don't know any more details if they're diversifying or if they expect Elemental to choose someone. But basically, Elemental, I believe, has the freedom to find the reactor and build it up. So very exciting. I don't know if Mike, that Mr. Kolodner, if that came across you later on.
Level, would you be aware of things like this?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I just came back from kind of in our being in the risk insurance industry. I call it risk and insurance prom. Like the industry's kind of biggest event was actually last week in Chicago. And I met with pretty much every one of the major tech companies around the risks associated with becoming major stakeholders in the energy critical energy infrastructure. And it's because this is kind of the story right now. I mean, this is the thing that's happening is, the demand side signals are so strong in terms of the amount of power that is anticipated to be required, and we're starting to see some of the largest consumers of that energy actually look to disintermediate those that traditionally have had kind of the monopoly on the delivery, to some degree on the generation. I mean, in the U.S., we've got basically.
Are you talking about utilities? Like utilities?
Yeah, sort of. If you think about the power sector, if we leave the molecule side off, right? Energy and power as an industry, there's three major kind of subsectors, if you will, in the power space. There's the investor-owned utilities, the for-profits, that are also highly regulated, that are kind of, the Con Eds, the Sempras, the PG&Es of the world that got those monopolies way back when. And they were traditionally vertically integrated. They would make the electrons and they would deliver the electrons, right? In the 1990s, deregulation occurred around the country, not everywhere, but in many states. And you may remember that kind of initial boom, and then we had the Enron issue, and then we've kind of come through the other end of it. But we've had competitive markets in the United States for a while. What that functionally means is we created this other class or subsector, which is independent power generators. And those would be the folks that literally just make electrons for money. Someone else will take care of, transmission and distribution, but they'll do it. Constellation Energy, the country's largest nuclear operator, great example of a big, successful independent power generator. The third class is what we call public power cooperatives, essentially the nonprofits. They look and often feel a lot like investor-owned utilities, but they're community-based. They've got a whole different set of incentives. They're regulated slightly differently, and ultimately, kind of those are the three categories. So when you look at a major load, right? Traditionally, petrochem, manufacturing, they actually consume most of the electrons off the grid. It's not us as individuals, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, we as Nukes get that, but most folks don't realize like the biggest consumers of electricity are our industry, and tech companies are now basically going, yeah, no, we are the largest, and they're so large that they're saying, okay, rather than kind of go and buy wholesale from utilities to deliver it, maybe we just partner with independent power. Maybe we find someone, maybe we build our own. Yeah. And this is not like, it's not new as a concept, because like if you think about physical plants at universities, for example, it's a good example, right? There's plenty of places, and I've got my own solar array at my house. There's plenty of places where you can generate power independent of the utility, kind of put it behind the meter, if you will.
Yeah.
But nobody's ever done it at this scale. I mean, nobody has ever, and so that's the conversation of the moment right now is, my gosh, the projections on the demand side, the amount of electricity that's going to be needed by these companies to support all of us is so big that they're basically saying, yeah, I'm not going to the buyer's window anymore. Not even the wholesale window. I'm stepping into those shoes, and I'm gonna play. And that's it's challenging for a number of reasons. One of which is, our regulatory infrastructure is a patchwork quilt. It's a giant, sticky morass, and that's not easy. But look, they're the biggest players. If anyone's gonna remake it, it's them. And there's plenty of incentive. I said to a very large tech company, not the one you referenced, but another one of our clients. I said, welcome to the party. You're now an energy company. You're not just a tech company. What's interesting is one of our nation's largest, the nation's largest investor-owned utility would say to you, they're not just a utility anymore. They're a tech company.
They're a data center.
So yeah, so it's a really cool time right now, I think, in that space.
Well, congrats to the Faraday boys. It's a huge deal, and the teams that are together. Really cool stuff.
And they're like brothers too. They're super competitive and they fight.
I watch them fight and yell at each other.
Because this guy and my sons. Oh, Mike's got 3 sons. Rob's got 2 sons. I got 3 sons. Yeah, it's like it's awesome. But
it's the Wright brothers. That's how we got the airplane. Kit brothers bought. So
Wright brothers. It's
there's
like Mike. I keep saying that we're just needing to teach the people of this country grade school math again. Like we don't need mega anymore. We need giga. We need gigawatts. We don't need killa and mega. We need giga. All right, Rob. All right, Rob, hit it up there.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for the analysis. So, and Mike, you touched on regulatory patchwork. So, I'll share some news. This is actually a rumor. It's not real news, but it's significant. But over the weekend, it was reported that there is a draft executive order coming out of the Trump administration that will overhaul regulations for the nuclear industry. There's some other things that it might do, but by and large, the rumor is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is going to have to change how it operates. Again, this is just a rumor. I don't know how it got leaked. There's other things in the executive order But here's some of the details: reduce the size of the staff, which would be contentious, regardless. Submitting new rules to the White House for review, and I don't see it in this article, but there's also a possibility. They're getting a little bit more surgical by saying, "Hey, let's get rid of the as low as reasonably achievable dose limits for radiation exposure." And before I open it up, I'm going to pop over to this thread by James Hoff, who's a fantastic read. He has great analyses on nuclear, and he kind of breaks down what he sees in this executive order. Right, increasing allowable public dose levels. So basically, you know, nuclear power plants are not contributing to our radiation exposure. There's bigger fish to fry, like the sun, for example. And but there's a great deal of work in the licensing process to show that your dose is going to be minimal. And then, of course, with construction and operations, that's one thing. My thoughts on this is let's see what happens. If there's a next administration that's maybe not Trump friendly, this thing could be overturned. 4 years sounds like a long time, but it's actually not in the nuclear industry. A lot of people in the nuclear industry have been, I'll say, begging for regulatory reform for a long time. So that we'll kind of see if that makes a difference. Because there's still a lot of risks, back to Mike's point, around construction and financing.
Well, I'm just I'm seriously surprised that the Trump White House has been so pro-nuclear, because I just thought they would be fossil fuel, and this is. I mean, I'm stoked about it, and
they are. Let me.
Yeah, Mike maybe speak more on this as a now that you speak to lots of energies, not just nuclear. And
Yep.
Okay, so one last thing. So this is a chart I've seen floating around. So this is why our government, Chris Wright, Secretary of Energy, has been so bullish on American energy, is because this is on the left, this is terawatt hours of generation, not capacity, but actual generation. And the United States over the last 20 years is somewhat flat, right? Solar, hydro, wind have made a contribution here, little uptick from nuclear with Vogel. But this is China. So it's not just like, me charging my cell phone. It's actual geopolitical advantage to be able to produce electricity.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I think the issue, I think you're spot on, Robin. I think it's not only is it a geopolitical advantage, but it's no longer a utility. That's the other big thing, is that electricity is not just something which we kind of take for granted. You flip on the switch, you get the lights. It's not that big of a cost. It's a major enabler of our economy and of our competitiveness. And this is a huge deal. It's also increasingly a consumer good, meaning, we care about, like, if I talk to my kids, they actually care about where the electrons come from and have opinions on it in ways that, certainly I didn't really think about as a kid and didn't really care about. So generations of people are starting to opine on, is it carbon free? Is it low carbon? Is it no carbon? It doesn't really, but there's opinions on that. And it doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. It just means, we now have consumers weighing in on it, and companies are too, right? I mean, that's really, it's not just the demand side that's driving, these big industrial users to use it. It's also the attributes associated with that consumption. They want a lower carbon footprint in many cases. And in some countries it's mandated. Obviously ours is taking a little different pack, but that's part of the equation too. I think that the nuclear stuff, though, I had heard about all that, Rob. What I hadn't heard was that there was even any discussion of, essentially ALARA is based off of that linear no threshold theory around exposure, right? And, that's been the driving force underpinning a big piece of where I started what I do. But, all the liability laws associated with the obligations that, we have to each other, all frankly, driven by that linear no threshold theory, is the root cause, if you will, of why we manage operate plants a very specific way, manage documentation, train people to certain standards. And yes, it's also created, enormous legal liabilities for those that generate power, which are super expensive and difficult to manage. And that's amazing that they're not just talking about reducing the regulatory or changing the regulatory environment. They're also talking about changing the legal environment.
Yeah. Okay. So that again, it's all rumors, anything can happen, but that would be like a fundamental like lever to pull right there. And I'm sure we can imagine all sorts of ways they can play out. But I'm curious, Mike, can you unpack what is the linear no thresholds theory? Or maybe I misspoke, but can you unpack it for us and our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, linear no threshold. Mike will tell you, I'm definitely a rock. I am a reluctant nuclear engineer. I did what I needed to do to be able to drive the boat, but I would say, yeah, I got to get qualified. I didn't get qualified. But I would say that, think about it this way. It's the concept that any exposure to radiation, no matter how low, is harmful. And my memory is that this was all based off of studies that were done, 4 generations ago, where we had limited data sets. And obviously, we know the story of what happened to Marie Curie, but also you've got, the acute doses that happen in places like Fukushima, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and then all those lessons learned that were in the back of our RADCOM manuals, right? I mean, so there is data out there, but those incidents, if you will, they're just like points on a chart. And so the linear no threshold basically says, well, like if we know it's really bad when someone's exposed to that level of radiation, we can then connect the dots and we can draw this line, and there's this linear line. And so it goes all the way down so that even the littlest amount, there's some damage. Now that's true. Like it's true. We all know, like we walk around and we get exposed to radiation and you can get sunburned and your cells do get damaged and regenerate. But it's a really controversial thing because there are some folks out there who would say some level of damage from radiation is actually part of how you generate new cells and how you stimulate new growth, right? And so there are some folks who would say there's health benefits in certain situations from, and it's a really tricky one. But for example, the adoption of the linear no threshold theory in the commercial nuclear industry is the reason, and in the U.S. Navy. Is the reason that we have all of those TLDs and we're managing and monitoring our exposure. And it's also the lack of adoption in the aviations why they don't have to do it on plates.
TLDs, a thermoluminescence.
Yes.
And why is that? What?
Okay, yeah,
Explain it.
it's a little thing that we wear on our belts that measures our radiation exposure. Because we work around a nuclear reactor and nuclear warheads for the three of us. So it monitors, and they get checks quarterly or something like that. Enough. Or when you get back from a patrol, you switch out your TLDs and you make sure you didn't. But the joke was that the person that always got the most radiation was the person that was out in the sun the most. The XO that had to run up the squadron all the time to physically lead the stuff. So like we with the reactor, we were getting very little, but back to Mike's point that the sun it's giving us all kinds of radiation every day, which is good. We need it and for heat. But
yeah. Well, and it was all that documentation, all of that was put in place in order to manage liability. So imagine somebody, there was this study that was done called the A.D. Little study. And the A.D. Little study looked at the incidence of cancer in a population set. I think it was like 1960s, 1950s. And it started seeing this, rapid growth in reported cancers. Now, again, causation, correlation, two different things. But it scared the heck out of certainly a lot of lawyers in the country around the nuclear industry, because they could predict that there would be a natural rise as the industry kind of continued to develop. There'd be a natural rise in the incidences of cancer, which would then theoretically drive a natural rise in the incidence of cancer of nuclear workers, who would then, presumably, some of them would suggest maybe that was because of exposures they got in plants. Now, the reality is all that turned out to be a really a funny kind of side note, because just like on the submarines, most commercial nuclear workers actually get less exposure than folks who are outside the plant and doing all that. So obviously that was fine. They also tend to be better educated, healthier, all those things that, decrease risk profiles. But better looking. What's fascinating to me though is, I had a situation once where, somebody got on a plane and I was a chem radcon officer, right? Somebody got on a plane, forgot to leave their TLD home, and now we got to write a report and do all that stuff. And it was you, Rob, right? Yeah.
It happened on our boat, yeah, and there was hell to pay. I mean, the dose was crazy, and they're like, "What did you do?" I took it on the plane,
Yeah, well, and everyone's got those stories from their boats. What's fascinating to me is another one of my Naval Academy classmates. He's flying around the world. He flew P3s. He's now flying for Delta. Has absolutely no idea how much exposure he's had, and yet when you consider how much more you get, whether you live, in Colorado or up on the plateau, in the Rockies, or whether you're flying at 30,000 feet, there's a much higher level. And it's the failure to adopt, not the failure, but it's the fact that we adopted it in commercial nuclear and in military nuclear, linear no threshold, which is why we monitor it to such a low level. Whereas like in the airline industry, yeah, they're comfortable. Like, there's no monitoring. And it's fascinating to me because there is, and this is the first job I had out of the Navy, was built around the cottage industry that developed to manage liabilities associated with exposure. Like, and I'm sitting in Hartford today, waiting for my partners at American Nuclear Insurers, the folks who insure nuclear liabilities at commercial nuclear power plants, to show up for a meeting. And it's it's been around since 1954.
So speaking of all those references you just made, Mike, to your knowledge of the industry, let's just segue. I mean, the whole point of this is for you to tell us a little bit about your career and how you got so knowledgeable in what industry you're in, and explain what you do at Marsh and what you've done in your career in regards to nuclear power, but energy in general. So
yeah, happy to. I mean,
yes, you Naval Academy, and go from there.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I went to the Naval Academy. I saw Top Gun like the rest of us and thought that would be really cool. It took me one, maybe a year and a half to realize maybe being a pilot wasn't going to be my calling. Not nothing against pilots, but, thought I wanted to do something else. I thought that the EOD stuff sounded really cool. And I whatever. I enjoyed my time at the Naval Academy. It was a great experience. I was one of those guys. I like to say it felt like there was a bit of an affirmative action program going on at the time. Skip Bowman, I was voluntold to be on that bus to go to Crystal City and, do the interview. Somehow made it through despite clearly not doing well in my interviews. I remember being told by Admiral Bowman, I guess you shouldn't have gotten that A in physics 2. And he was referring to when I took physics, I'd missed a couple weeks for a sailing as I was racing on the intercollegiate team. And I'd missed a couple weeks and I'd gotten a D in physics 1, but then the second semester I got an A. And that was apparently their justification. Yeah, it was like, well, you must be smart enough, if you were around. Anyway, so that was coming into submarines. I was on the Henry M. Jackson. That was a great experience. That's where I qualified, did 2 patrols there. Got to do half a deployment on the Tucson with some classmates and avoid some shipyard time, which was wonderful. Was one of those nukes that made the decision to get out without doing a shore tour. So I'm one of those weird guys. Yeah. All right. So, but I really enjoyed it. And when I got out, the thing I didn't know what to do, but was like that great gift. It's like, okay, you get this moment in time where you get to choose what you want to do. And my wife and I were really deliberate about it. And we'd gotten out in Seattle, basically, in the Northwest. And because I'd entered the Naval Academy in New Hampshire, there's pretty much nowhere the Navy wasn't going to send our stuff, right? I mean, we could go just about anywhere. So we had planned to drive around the country, spend a year camping, hiking, just seeing the United States. We pulled the goalie 3 months in. I got to get health care. My son shows up 6 months after that, so it's, or 9 months after that. So it's, it was, next thing I know, I'm sitting in an interview in Northern Virginia, went to like a Kmart and bought a white shirt and used like an Old Navy tie, like my black, like SDB tie. And then, met this guy who was like, hey, you're a nuke. And I was like, yeah, I'm a nuke. I mean, I don't know that I want to be in nuclear engineering per se. I don't know that was really my strength. And he said, well, there's this company, and since the 1960s, they've been hiring uh, officers directly out of the naval nuclear program because we consult to energy companies, and it's a lot easier to teach them risk and insurance than it is, frankly, to go the other route and try to teach somebody or give someone credibility. And I was like, and I even said, I remember at the time saying, look, you can ask around. I'm definitely not, top of my class. I think I did get through prototype pretty quick, which was I think that was a weird thing. But outside of that, I don't remember. I don't remember ever being considered a stellar nuke. I would say I was definitely fourth quartile. And they were like, no, that doesn't matter. You made it through. You did all that stuff. And the reality is, what we need you to focus on is, they've got engineers, they've got all those capabilities. What we need you to do is help them think about and manage the risks financially and commercially. And I was like, well, that's actually kind of what I want to do. I was thinking about consulting. I was thinking about banking. I was thinking about finance in general. And so it was a kind of a nice niche. So I wound up, Marsh McLennan is one of the oldest, highest performing publicly traded companies in the United States that most people have never heard of. We are the single largest intermediary between risk capital markets, insurance companies and reinsurance companies, and corporate and individual users of those products. So more money flows through Marsh McLennan with respect to kind of insurance risk transfer than any one insurance company, and certainly any other intermediary. So we represent, it's actually a very cool story. We're over 150 years old. We were founded by an insurance agent from Duluth, Minnesota, and another one from Chicago, and they partnered up and they came up with this crazy concept of, rather than selling insurance on behalf of insurance companies, what if we actually represented, what if the thing of value was actually the risk? So if the insurance companies are basically trying to accumulate all these premium dollars so that they can then invest it and go make money, that's actually how they mostly make money, is on the investment side. Then you've got an asset. If you've got a risk and you have to buy insurance, that's worth something to those insurance companies. So we actually represent, primarily, our business that was one of the first to differentiate and do it different. But we literally represent companies, help them manage risk. If they want to buy insurance, nobody can do that better than us, and we're an independent advocate for them. We don't, we're not selling on behalf of the companies, trying to sell them a product. We're representing the companies, helping them understand those risks, and essentially selling their risk to the market. So it's it's a pretty cool thing. And I was surrounded when I got out by like multiple generations of Navy nukes. And so I had, including like one of the former CEOs of my company. So, I immediately had kind of like a club, a network, a group of mentors. And as I went through it, that chart you showed, Rob, with the flat line on the demand, on the generation, as soon as I got qualified at Marsh, I realized pretty quickly, like, I wasn't in a growth industry. Like, we weren't seeing, we were doing CapEx and life extensions and maybe bringing some new plants here and there, but it's not like we were in a growth profile. And so I pretty much, kind of bumped up against, well, if I want to keep growing professionally, what do I do? The cool thing was, the nukes that were my mentors at Marsh were like, actually, yeah, that's a great idea. Get some different experience. Maybe go work for a client for a few years, and maybe that's a great pathway and you keep doing that, or maybe you come back. So I wound up going to Exelon. We acquired Constellation while I was there. I got a whole nother network of nuclear brethren, some of whom were Navy, some of whom were just pure commercial. And I got to learn, how it works from the inside, be part of that team.
When were you at Exelon? Because I was at General Electric from 08 to 14, and Exelon was one of our customers.
So we were
in business.
We were one of your biggest customers, as I recall. I was there 09. I think it was 2009. I'll check my LinkedIn profile. It's 2009 to 2014, plus or minus.
Oh,
yeah, we definitely oversee, man. Yeah, and I actually, GE was our single largest counterparty. It was a $600 million annual spend at the time. And my favorite part was, because I was in the risk side of it. So working with the attorneys, we had an attorney whose sole job was just to continue to try to negotiate the as of yet unexecuted contract between Exelon and GE back then. And it was, full-time job. Yeah, GE, we spent a lot of time with the GE folks, but it was, yeah, great experience. Cause like, yeah, I got to interface with GE, or to interface with West. Oh yeah.
Such a well-run company. Yeah.
Oh,
Really.
I got exposed. You might have seen the news on 3 Mile Island, which is now being renamed the Crane Clean Energy Center. You know, Chris Crane was there for when he took the raise. And his kind of right hand number 2, guy by the name of Bill Von Haney, who was not a nuke, but really appreciated nukes. And I got some of the best mentorship and best experience, you know, sitting at the end of a long table with all 17 of their, you know, site vice presidents and the chief nuclear officer at the head of the table, and having to be at the end and kind of account for even the littlest thing around insurance at a nuclear power plant was a great experience. Pretty, you know, almost immediately when I got there. So I mean, that was good. Yeah. So I did that, and then went back to Marsh, and then almost immediately, it was actually kind of more driven by Exelon and the folks there, but the utilities had created an insurance company. Well, Marsh had created it for the utilities in the 1970s. And it's literally one of the coolest stories. But the nuclear industry decided, rather than paying commercial insurers money for stuff, they actually took the next leap, which is like, well, what if we just start our own insurance company and keep the money? And so they went through that. That was a relatively novel idea back in the 70s. So I actually went to go join the leadership team of that entity, which was going through some challenges at the time. And we were going to do a rebranding, and we launched some new products and services. And so I got to be on a management team for 5 years, a company called Nuclear Electric Insurance Limited. And that was only because of that opportunity that I had at Marsh, which led to Exelon, which was the largest owner of NEAL, owned about 20% of it. It's a $4 billion, in insurance terms, we kind of think about things. So how much money do you have in your surplus, assets less liabilities? It's a $4 billion company. It was awesome. And then I came back to Marsh in about 5 years ago, and basically took over there. There was a lot of money going into renewable energy, so I had to get schooled up on solar and wind and all these other things, which I'd had a little exposure to at Exelon Constellation, but not much. And then, yeah, so I took over the renewable business. I took over the power business. I'm now responsible for our energy and power business in the U.S. And I kind of sit on that. We have kind of like a global board internally. And so I oversee renewable energy, clean energy growth globally for Marsh, mostly helping colleagues in other countries, just make sure that, you know, they have access to the right resources and insights, things like that. Awesome. So it's super fun. Yeah. Super fun. Yeah.
The new
A lot of fun.
strong. I mean, the mentorship that y'all have and that network is unreal. It's unmatched, I think, in other communities. What you all have is really unique.
No, but
Agreed.
Mike, I mean, not to keep tooting your horn, but you really have hit most of the parts of your industry. When you were with Echelon, you were with the customer, and then Marsh, you were with the brokerages, and then when you were with NEAL, you were at the actual insurer. And really, you have great perspective as far as now. I guess with like our earlier news story, with maybe the government saying nuclear is not as risky, like that totally will affect you, right? I mean,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, like, for us, like, I would say we're in the, when we think about it, right? Like there were unacceptable failures, right? Like, when we're on a submarine, there are things that you don't want to think about, and you're going to do things a certain way, no matter how frustrating it is, no matter how challenging it is, because the outcomes are unacceptable if you don't. Even if it's a really low probability, even if it probably won't ever happen, theoretically could, it sometimes does. And, that is the world, that my clients live in. And they manage it, and they have to do it. But to be fair, right, not all of them are at the level of say a Constellation, Exelon, right? I mean, Constellation had 17, when I was there, we had 17 site vice presidents, all of whom, scared me more than, certainly the naval reactors. I mean, these guys were responsible for assets, knew it, and they had to produce electricity. Otherwise the economy stalled out. I mean, it was, it was a big deal. So, to me, there's a lot of risk inherent in it, but I like to think about it in terms of like, part of what I have to do is figure out, all right, what is the appetite for, my client? Some companies are large, some are small. It might be 150 billion market cap company. In the case of some of these tech companies, might be larger. But the average, like a mid-sized utility is like, low single, like high single to low double digit, market cap. There's only so much risk they can wear as an organization. And oh, by the way, if something like a nuclear incident happens, they're probably not allowed to do anything anymore. I mean, look at what happened after Fukushima, right? So so the management of risk, is a math problem, is a challenging one. And if you change the rules, well, then you got to redo all the math and you got to undo things that are in place. I mean, some of the rules, like there's a requirement after the 3 Mile Island incident. There had been no requirement. You had to buy insurance and have insurance basically to cover the risk that you screwed up and other people were harmed. So bodily injury, property damage, the liability side. But there was no requirement in the United States back then to like have financial assurance to rebuild, repair, or really stabilize, decontaminate, and decommission prematurely an asset. The presumption was like, one, you wouldn't have it, and believe it or not, they've got these decommissioning funds that the industry has. So the thought was like, you'd have plenty of money to like clean it up if you broke it. Well, after 3 Mile Island, we realized that wasn't actually the case. So today there is a federal requirement. Every licensed nuclear operator by a certain site has to buy insurance for their own, to clean up their own stuff. So,
Okay.
yeah. So you start changing these rules, it actually changes, and this is the fun part for me. The cost of risk can be calculated. It's a function of both the CapEx in the beginning and the OpEx over the life of the asset, which if you are a student of cash flows and how you value assets, what it means is cost of risk impacts the underlying asset value. So if it's high, right, it's going to basically be like a cost incurred over time, which then erodes the net present value of the asset. And so part of what I do is literally help companies like, the value of a nuclear plant in Constellation's hands, all things being equal, because they're big and they manage risk really well, versus a smaller entity, that doesn't necessarily manage risk as aggressively, right? It means that the asset is actually worth more in Exelon's or Constellation's hands than in a smaller player.
Oh, okay.
So it's,
yeah.
So anyway, the changing of the rules has huge impacts for my industry, for what we do. And then by extension, it actually will impact the value of a nuclear generating asset, which, people always talk about this. Is nuclear too expensive? What is it relative? That drives me crazy, because anyone who's in asset valuation knows, well, it all depends over what time period, what's the revenue stream, how many, and we didn't talk about this with the tech companies, but like the other thing that's happening for nuclear right now is, traditionally in the utility model, if you go to a utility window and you say, I want electrons, right? That's one way that electricity is priced. And depending on what market it's operating in, the value of the electrons and what power trades for, if you will, is pretty limited. There's not many ways you can use it. But today we're actually seeing different revenue models emerge, which means that some people will say, yeah, I'm willing to pay way more for electricity. Right. And that's joules.
So on that, so Google earlier, that's a brand new market entrant. Yeah. And they have a specific need. They might pay more per electron, but they're going to own the whole thing and it's going to last forever.
So those are, look at what they're looking for. Like, they don't make money. Their overarching revenue model is not successful unless they have the underlying source of power. Now, they can make so much money doing these other things that they can pay more for power. That's a really fascinating. Now, the converse one is we held an event for all of our energy and power clients down in Houston in the beginning of January. And we had the CEO of Huntsman Chemical, Peter Huntsman, was our keynote. And, you might say, why are we bringing in a chemical company to talk to a bunch of energy and power people? And the answer was because the cost of electricity in Europe, particularly in Germany, as a result of phasing out nuclear power plants, had gotten so high that he could no longer operate competitively in Europe and literally had to shut down. And we're seeing that. Like it does, cost of electricity for different types of businesses is more or less impactful. But certainly for industries that rely on an enormous amount of energy to produce their goods and services, this is existential for them. So
I think we've got one more question, then we'll wrap. And so shameless plug from me. My company signed a deal with Allo Atomics here in Austin that they make pods with reactors, small modular reactors, and we're building out their generative AI tools for licensing. So they're going to be pursuing many different sites at once. So Mike, can you talk about that market, the emerging kind of startup, small modular reactors? If risk is based on, CapEx and the life of the asset, these are brand new assets, right? So
Yeah.
are you guys looking at that, and how do you model those?
Yeah, no, we definitely are. And, one of my favorite things to remind folks, and one, yeah, this is what the coolest thing about nuclear is right now, is there are so many new businesses, new kind of ways of working within the industry. We're really breaking a lot of molds. I mean, if you go back to like the 50s and 60s, it's a very small number of players. When I was at Exelon, Constellation, it was either a Westinghouse contract or a GE contract. That's where our units were coming from, right? And obviously then there were the other suppliers. But the interesting thing about it is like when you look at all of that kind of opportunity and where it fits, I love reminding folks that these units most of the units operating today, they were licensed for 40 years. The concept of a life extension, a 20-year, was like new. All of a sudden it was like, hey, these things can keep going. Can we make them keep going? And we're now at, second, third, years. Yeah. Right. And I would say like, one of the other assets we owned at Exelon was one of the oldest hydro facilities in the United States on the Susquehanna River, called the Conowingo Dam. Right. This is built in like 1905, 1904, something like that. It was crazy. On the same river where one of the first electric turbines was used to generate electricity. It was actually like they took the first steam turbines were actually vertically mounted because they were initially designed for hydros. So it's run of river stuff. So anyway, Susquehanna River's got some really cool old power plants on it. But the reality was, like, nobody thought when you built Conowingo or when you built Peach Bottom Nuclear Station, which is literally a mile upriver, nobody thought those were going to be around 100 years later. And yet they are. And it's not just the underlying value of the asset's a function of a couple things, one of which is the real estate, tapping into the grid and all these supporting infrastructure that's around. Like, that's really important. Obviously, the loads that are around and the demand on the system. It doesn't do any good to build a big generating source somewhere where nobody can use it and you get those transmission losses anyway. So there's a couple of factors that impact it, but one of them, that cost of risk one, and I remind people all the time, I'm like, it's all about over what period you look at it, right? So if you look at a nuclear project, and if you go back and look at some of the stuff around like levelized cost of energy, it's all, well, a nuclear plant is a 40-year asset. No, it's not. It's a 100-year asset.
Wow.
Right? And all of a sudden, nuclear is way cheaper. And I've been saying this for a while. A lot of nuclear professionals have been saying this for a while. This isn't new. What's really cool is we're starting to see that in the general public. We're starting to see that, folks who are not us. My wife always said, like, we had the worst PR in the entire world. Like, the nuclear industry just had it, right? But the work that, NEI and other advocates, independent advocates, are doing is starting to take hold. And I think, politicians on both sides of the aisle get, oh, I get it. And China doing it is definitely something which is catching people's attention. And so, you kind of look at it and go, yeah, it's a super exciting time. And there's so many ways to be involved in it. But if you believe that it's important to have, reliable 24/7 access to power, and if you believe the attributes associated with that, whether you believe in climate change or not, it's irrelevant. It's kind of like leave no trace. Like, I think about, like what you learn when you first start hiking, and like just try to leave it, at or better than you found it. And so there is an element to nuclear where when you look at the footprint from nuclear, it's like, there's none, right? And even, God forbid, something happens, is generally highly, highly localized. So whereas, like, many traditional sources, it's like, well, it goes up the stack and, well, I don't know, which way does the wind blow, right? Like, where's it go? So, I think it's a super exciting time. There's lots of ways to do it. And we're spending a lot of time talking to clients right now about how to work through those problems, think through cost of risk. And again, cost of risk for me, it depends on who it is. I always say that the best example I give to people on this is, like, I got, two of my sons now drive a car, right? So they got to buy insurance. I got to buy insurance, right? Yeah. I'm not buying insurance for much of anything. If I ding up my car, I damage something, I got enough financial strength, I'll take care of myself or deal with it. my sons, like they got jobs and they're doing some stuff, but like much bigger impact on them if suddenly, their car's out of service and they can't get to work and they don't have the cash in hand. And it's the same thing with my clients in the space. Some are, cash poor, some have, enormous amounts of leverage. They can borrow money. Some have really stable cash flows. Some have really volatile ones. And all of that impacts ultimately how much risk they can kind of wear. And that ultimately, is a big piece of what we're spending time talking to folks about. And it's fascinating because there's so many new players, and so many different risks that, I always say the best part about insurance is, in order to finance anything, you pretty much have to have some level of financial assurance. Nobody loans anyone money if there's actually any risk involved. And so, we get to be at the very, very front end of all these deals. So pretty cool.
An exciting place to be in a really exciting time in nuclear energy. Mike, thanks so much for spending a part of your day with us. It's incredible stuff. You bring such great knowledge to this podcast.
And
Thank
we're
you so much.
proud of everything you've done and
Sure.
maintaining a pretty killer family and being an advocate
Oh, you guys
for
are.
a lot of us. I mean, and for helping the greater Navy nuclear community out over the last 10 years. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.